Welcome to Pachehra Talks. In today's video, we are going to continue the AKS container cluster security. As you can see here on the screen, we have started from here, Azure AKS container security. First video, we talked about threat protection, which was MS Defender for containers and all those four domains that it helps us. Then we try to secure the AKS API with all these points that we talked about. And then we restrict the access for the IMDS, which is instance metadata service, and that's the IP address through the network policies. And today we are going to explore the remaining points. These were the remaining points. We'll pick two of them today, and then we'll complete the other two in our next video. And then we'll dig further into the security in upcoming videos. All right, so let's get started. Today, securing container access to resources in AKS. That's the topic. That's the fourth point that we need to explore, we need to understand. And it involves a set of practices designed to minimize the potential attack surface and enhance the overall security of the containerized application. So, what is the goal here? The goal is minimize the potential attack surface, right? If there is a less surface for the attack, it will be more secure as compared to more surface to attack. So hence it will enhance the security. So the primary strategy is to adhere to the principle of least privilege by limiting the permissions and capabilities available to containers. That's how we can easily achieve it. How? Through the least privilege principle, right? And limiting the uh, permissions and capabilities. These three things is going to summarize everything that we're going to talk today in this secure container access to the resources. All right, so what will this help us to achieve? The very first is minimize the potential attack, and it will help us to prevent malicious actions, contain potential breaches, and reduce the impact of exploits. One of the pillar of the zero trust, like two pillars of the zero trust now, blast radius and the limiting permissions or least privileged principle. All right, so let's dig all these best practices that we can implement to achieve our goal or through these practices. So the very first is avoid the use of root access. What are we doing here? We are limiting the permission or least access principle. Avoid use of root access. Where exactly are we avoiding this? In the containers. So running containers as the root user can provide potential attackers with elevated privileges if they manage to compromise the container, right? So instead, containers should be run with non-root user, to limit the damage that can be done in the event of a compromise. So what do you need to do to achieve this? Well, as you can see on the screen, this is the Docker file, and that's all we need to do. So when building a Docker container image, you got to specify a non-root user in your Docker file. And this configuration ensures that the application runs as the non-privileged node user right here, which doesn't have the permissions to execute system level commands that could alter the host environment or other containers. So that's how we can achieve it, by avoiding use of root access for the containers. What is the second point? We need to disable the privileged escalation. What it is? Well, privileged containers can access all devices on the host, and it's a cluster, right? So there's so many things running there, and we don't want anyone who are not supposed to access will get the access. So privileged containers can access all devices on the host with the same privileges as process running on the host. So this should be disabled to prevent containers from gaining additional privileges that can lead to host compromise. So what you need to do to disable it, as you can see here in the YAML file, what you need to do, right? In your Kubernetes pod specification, set allow privileged escalation to false and do not run the container in privilege mode. Simple. And we should have these practices implemented when we are running our pods or preparing the YAML file. This security context prevents the container from gaining additional privileges through mechanisms such as set UID or set GID binaries. And the third point is, so here is root access avoid, here is disable the privilege escalation, here is limit access to actions, limiting access to actions that container can perform. It's all about container. Eventually it's the container which is running at the core, right? There's a cluster, there is a node, there is a pod, but at the core it's container. So restrict the capabilities of containers to minimum necessary for their operation. This involves limiting the Linux capabilities that can be added or removed from a container. So define specific capabilities for a container, and drop all or remove all, as you can see right here. Okay, so in this configuration, the container drops all capabilities, right? Except for net bind service, which allows it to bind a socket to privileged ports, port number less than 1024. This is useful for applications that need to open a listening socket on a privileged port, but do not require other elevated privileges. So you need to think for this piece of the YAML file. Now we have another one is using security context. Using security context. A security context defines privilege and access control settings for a pod or container. Kubernetes security context setting include, but are not limited to, capabilities, SE Linux options, and other or the user ID that can run the container. As you can see, apply security context at the pod level to enforce read-only root file system and run as a specific user. Read-only file system true, right? So by implementing these security measures, you effectively limit what containers can do if they're compromised. That's the point. Secure container access to the resources. So that's how we can limit what containers can do if they're compromised, reducing the risk to your AKS environment. So these practices are crucial for maintaining the integrity, security integrity of containerized applications, ensuring that even if a container is compromised, the potential for damage is significantly contained and controlled. That's how we should plan for the security. Right now, let's go and talk about the fifth point, which is regularly updates to the latest version of Kubernetes. Right. Keeping your AKS cluster up to date is critical security practice that ensures your infrastructure benefits from the latest features. As we can see, why we need to keep the this AKS updated to the latest version. Here is why. These are the points that we need to discuss. That's why. So let's pick these points one by one and understand the importance of updating to the latest version. The very first is, like any software, Kubernetes has its vulnerabilities, right? So as these are discovered, the Kubernetes community and Azure, of course, rapidly work to patch them. By updating to the latest version, you ensure that your cluster is protected against known vulnerabilities that have been resolved in your version, just like any other software updates we have. Microsoft has so many updates, then the new version then released. The same process. The second point is bug fixes. So we understand these security vulnerabilities. Now, bug fixes. Why? Because updates often include fixes to bugs that could impact the stability and reliability of your cluster. These bugs might affect a wide range of components, from minor issues in the user interface to critical problems in the underlying container orchestration logic. Hence, you should have that. Finally, not finally, like other point is new releases of Kubernetes often come up with the optimization and enhancement just like any other software. New features, improvements, not new feature, but the performance improvement because we have another point as new feature. So this could include more efficient handling of containers, improvements in scheduling algorithms, and better resource management. Then Kubernetes is actively developed. There is two releases in an year. People are working 24/7 to make it better. How? With new features and capabilities. So they are adding new features and capabilities regularly. Staying current with the latest version allow you to take advantage of these advancements which can improve your ability to manage, secure and scale your applications. And finally, compliance, which is the most important. For many organizations, compliance with regulatory standards requires that software components are kept up to date with security patches. Regularly updating Kubernetes helps meet these compliance requirements. All right, so now we understood why it is important, but the question is how we can achieve it. So here are a few points that we have note down for you so that we can understand how. So the very first point is you got to review the release notes. You should know what you're going to update. So that's what you got to review. So before upgrading, review the release notes for the new Kubernetes version. This will help you understand any changes that might affect your application, including deprecated APIs or any altered behaviors. For example, Kubernetes might deprecate certain APIs that your applications are using. Knowing this in advance allows you to modify your application code before performing the upgrade. Hence, you got to review the release notes that always comes with the new release. Then, of course, once you are aware of the release notes, you know the things that you are going to change in your AKS. So what you gotta do? You want to test it in your staging environment. You don't want to put it in the production because you don't know how your application is going to react. So deploy the new Kubernetes version in a staging environment that mirrors your production environment as closely as possible. So test the behavior of your critical applications on the updated version to ensure there are no compatibility issues or unexpected behaviors. Then you need to use AKS upgrade features because how you are going to do it? You have that feature in build. So leverage AKS built-in upgrade features to update the cluster. AKS allows you to control the upgrade process, such as specifying when nodes are upgraded to minimize downtime. You could use Azure CLI to perform a rolling upgrade of your AKS cluster. This method upgrades one node at a time, just like you upgrade your pods, one pod at a time, ensuring that your service remains available during the upgrade process. So these are the steps we should follow, and that's how we upgrade. We should read the notes, test it, and then use the AKS upgrade feature. And finally, you need to closely monitor the upgrade process and check for any issues that comes or arises. Utilize Azure Monitor and AKS diagnostics to keep track of the cluster's health, which is very important. You got to set up alerts for key metrics such as pod, restarts, node conditions, and API server responsiveness during the upgrade. You should have those alerts ready. Uh, and finally, you should validate once it is updated, which is post upgrade validation. Once the upgrade is complete, perform a thorough validation of the cluster to ensure that all components are functioning correctly. Run your application test suites and check for any performance degradation or service disruptions that might have been caused by the upgrade. So, regularly updates to your AKS cluster are crucial for maintaining a secure, stable, and efficient Kubernetes environment. By following best practices for upgrading and using the tools provided by Azure, you can ensure that your AKS cluster takes full advantage of the ongoing improvements made by the Kubernetes community, while minimizing the risk of security vulnerabilities and compliance issue, and of course, enhance the security and performance. These things will help you to enhance the security, performance, and new feature in place. And of course, compliance is something very important. We always want to meet it. So with this, let's close the video and we'll cover other points which are remaining. These 2 points in our upcoming video. I hope it was informative and you guys like it. Well, thank you for watching and you guys have a wonderful day. Bye bye.